My name is Angie Nicholas. I am the wife of John, who is a stage 4 colorectal cancer survivor. He was diagnosed about 5.5 years ago. I also happen to be a family practice physician and a chief medical officer at Einstein Medical Center, Montgomery, in the Philadelphia area in Montgomery County. I think when you're first diagnosed with cancer, you really want to know what the best options are out there. And for most patients, the best thing to do first is to do standard of care. Typically, depending on your stage and depending on the type of cancer you have, that's going to be a combination of surgery and or chemotherapy and or radiation therapy. And our goal obviously is to get you to what we commonly call NED, or no evidence of disease. There will come a time, or there may come a time, where the standard of care isn't working anymore. You've been through first, second, or third line chemotherapies, for example. Your tumors don't seem to be responding anymore, and then you need to start looking. I always encourage caregivers and patients to look early, to understand what's out there, to understand the different trials. Even when doctors tell you, though, that you're incurable, don't believe them. Start doing your research now. Start looking for options, because we have lots and lots and lots of stories around our friends and family that have been told, you'll never be cancer-free, that do become cancer-free, and that's ultimately the goal. For my husband, John, he started out with chemotherapy and then had surgeries, and then had chemotherapy and then had ablations and surgeries. And then we got to the point where he continued to have tumor growth. And so then we really started to look at looking for clinical trials. Because I had been looking for clinical trials really very early into the chemotherapy that he started, I was aware of the trial finder and aware of what kind of trials were out there. So it actually became, I want to say easy, but at least I already understood what it was that I was looking for. The other issue is you really need to be, I don't want to say 100% healthy for trials, but you don't want trials to be the last, your last attempt at trying to cure cancer. You really want to be in a fairly good health. And so if you've been through, 2 different chemotherapies, for example, and those therapies don't seem to be working, that's the time to start asking about clinical trials. Even if you're going to do a third line of chemotherapy, it doesn't hurt to go and start talking to your oncologist about clinical trials, or go in and talk to a physician who's running a clinical trial about the trial and whether that would be a good time for you to get involved in that trial. There are certain kinds of things that exclude you from trials, like abnormal blood chemistries, for example, very elevated liver enzymes. So you don't want to be in a situation where you've waited and waited and waited, and now, unfortunately, because of circumstances, things are too late. There's never a bad time to start looking at clinical trials. It may not be the right time right away. The other thing that you really need to know about is your tumor genetics. There are lots of terminologies out there: KRAS, microsatellite status. You need to know what the tumor genomics are to really start to look for clinical trials really early into the cancer treatment program. You want to start talking with your oncologist and then getting them to help you understand what is the right time for clinical trials. So I think there's 3 places to go to look. The first is talk to your oncologist. Typically, you need to be receiving care at the National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers for them to have clinical trials. If you're at a place in your community that is not an NCI designated center, they may have trials that they are partnering with the NCI designated center, but typically the smaller cancer centers may not have clinical trials. But your oncologist may also have contacts at a larger center to be able to refer you to them to get evaluated for clinical trials. The second thing is you can go to the internet and look at sites of other cancer centers. So for example, my husband and I live in the Philadelphia area. I routinely scour places that are in a location that we're willing to commute to look for other trials that maybe I haven't seen. You can go to clinicaltrials.gov. That's another place. Clinicaltrials.gov is an amazing wealth of resources. All of the clinical trials in the United States for every single disease are located on that clinicaltrials.gov resource. So while it's a great resource, it's incredibly overwhelming. And I started looking for clinical trials by going onto that website. And if you type in colorectal cancer, you'll probably get, I don't know, a couple million hits on clinical trials. That's just not manageable. All of these methodologies really led a small group of people to creating the Stage 4 Trial Finder. And right around the time that I started thinking about trials, that John was at the point where we were needing to really consider clinical trials, is when I got connected with a group of people who were creating what is now called our Stage 4 Trial Finder. So when I first started using the Stage 4 Trial Finder, it was literally just a spreadsheet. A group of us, contributed if we found trials that looked like they were something that would be interesting to Stage 4 colorectal cancer patients. We had 2 people who were collating those trials and really keeping that trial finder up to date. But as you can imagine, that then becomes overwhelming as well for just 2 people to do it. And that's when CRC got involved along with Flatiron to really create the tool that we have now, that is now the Stage 4 Trial Finder. The great thing about the Trial Finder is you can really start to filter the data based on the phase of the trial, the location of where you are and how far you're interested or willing or able to travel, the recruitment status, and whether or not you've had immunotherapy, because all of those are factors that really determine for you, what trials would be appropriate for you or your loved one to get involved with. Geography, while you think, oh, I'll go anywhere, I'll do anything to take care of my loved one. Yes, that's true. All of us would say that, but you have to be practical about it. In a lot of trials, you'll need to travel, sometimes weekly, sometimes every other week. Are you really able to travel across the country every other week or every week to receive care or to get an infusion or to have a biopsy or all of the other things? So you really need to think about that. How far can you travel? How far are you willing to travel on a regular basis? Phase of the trial. So there are, phases are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 trials I fondly call spaghetti at the wall. These are ideas that clinicians have that are based in science, and typically you'll see them called dose escalation trials. What that means is they're really looking for the right dose of the drug that frankly doesn't become toxic to the people taking it, and that is tolerated. There becomes a risk benefit if you give someone, for example, 15 milligrams of a drug and they feel pretty good, and then 20 milligrams and they have a lot of nausea, and then 30 milligrams and they vomit every day for 2 weeks. That's probably, we're now in that area where you're going to say that the risk isn't, the benefit isn't worth the risk there. Phase 2s then are the next phase of the drug where they're really trying to figure out, okay, we figured out what dose works, and now, does the science actually work? Is this something real that we think would actually change the way that we provide care to our colorectal cancer patients? Phase 3 trials, I'll be honest, are very few and far between. I've never actually seen a phase 3 trial, although there probably is 1 or 2 on the Trial Finder. These are drugs that we say, yes, the science works, and now you need the final pieces of these trials to really get this drug to market. So it's the last step before those drugs actually go to market. At one point, meds like oxaliplatin and irinotecan and Folfox and Folfree were all phase 1 trials. So, don't say never, because at some point, those drugs may be the drug and may be something that really changes the science and changes the way that care is provided. And the last is immunotherapy. So there are a lot of immunotherapy trials out there, and immunotherapy for, I've been fortunate enough that my husband's been, being treated for over 5 years. So immunotherapy was not a possibility when he first started with his cancer treatment. Immunotherapy has now become the next best thing, and trying to figure out what drugs, as I fondly call, and my oncologist fondly says, makes cold tumors hot. A lot of our loved ones and our colorectal cancer survivors are microsatellite stable, which means that they typically don't respond to immunotherapies. And so we're always looking for drugs to turn on the cancer, to make the cancer attractive to the immunotherapy drug. So some of the trials that you'll see are not open to patients that have already had immunotherapy. As a result of that, if you've already had immunotherapy, you may be excluded. There are a lot of trials now that will allow you to do do another immunotherapy if you failed the first one, because again, different drugs and different trials, and there are different science behind it. But you do need to make sure you're aware of the immunotherapy status and whether, if you've had immunotherapy, whether that trial would allow another immunotherapy, previous immunotherapy drug. We're very fortunate that the first trials that we got into were actually trials on the Trial Finder. Every trial has been a trial on the Trial Finder. And we've had access, because we live in Philadelphia, we have had access to National Cancer Institute designated center. So there's been lots of trials available to us. But I've been also very fortunate that our oncologist is very fascinated by the Trial Finder and is very interested in the work that is being done with the Trial Finder. And so I typically will I'll download the spreadsheet. I'll go through the spreadsheet. I'll filter for the phase of the trial and the geography. And then from there, look through and say, okay, here's all the trials we eliminated before. And then say to our oncologist, okay, here's 20 trials that are in locations that we're able to travel to, that fit John's genetic profile, that seem reasonable. Can you help me narrow it down? And so, again, our oncologist has been fabulous in being very willing to partner with me in narrowing down the trials and then helping me apply to those locations where those trials are located. Again, I think it's a matter of using the Trial Finder, narrowing down to the top 20 trials, and then using my trusted advisors, which happens to be my oncologist, for the next step of that. Once you pick a place, let's talk a little bit maybe about what happens, because I think that's another important piece of this, of clinical trials. So I actually have a list of every single treatment that John has had with all of the dates. And when I apply to a trial, I send them an email and introduce myself and introduce John and say, I'm applying for this trial. And in the body of the clinical trial, it gives you the contact information. So I typically send them an email, say, hi, I'm applying for my husband for this trial. Here's his treatment summary. Here's his most recent blood work. And here's a copy of his most recent CAT scan report. That usually starts the process. Sometimes they send an email. Sometimes they call and say, oh, that's great. We're really interested in this information. They typically will want your oncologist's last note, along with a copy of the disc of the CAT scan that is most recent. When my husband has CAT scans, I always request a copy of it so that I can put it in, put in a FedEx envelope that day and send it off. The faster that you get them the data, the quicker the response time and the turnaround time is with getting you a screening appointment. Once they get the information they need, they'll offer you, if you qualify, they'll offer you a screening appointment. Then you'll go there. You may have a doctor's visit, They may say, oh, your CAT scan's 2 months old. We're going to get another CAT scan today. Another hint, don't forget to ask for a copy of that CAT scan because your oncologist will want it. Get a copy of that CAT scan and the report so you have that when you go back to your local oncologist. And then they'll let you read through and they'll talk through the clinical trial and what it means. And then you'll have to sign a consent that states that you understand that you're participating in a clinical trial and this is what that trial means. And they'll spend a lot of time educating you on the trial, on what that trial means. Sometimes they'll want follow-up things before they'll definitely say you're in, or they'll need to take you to a review committee. Sometimes they do that as well. So they'll typically send you an appointment schedule. The most recent clinical trial John was in, they sent me an appointment. They said, they set up a time, you're gonna come and visit, you're gonna have a day of testing, and then we're gonna have signed consents, and then, we'll tell you from there what the next steps are. So you should expect, what's my schedule? And they're very good about giving you a schedule because some trials, for example, it needs you to take a drug at the same time every day for 2 weeks and record your symptoms. Some of them will say you'll take your drug today and then tomorrow you'll come and you'll be there all day because you'll need to get blood work every 2 hours. Or you'll show up today and you'll get a CAT scan and then you'll come tomorrow and you'll go to the infusion center and you'll get a drug and then we'll do blood work every hour for 8 hours. There's lots of different variances depending on the clinical trial. So the schedule is really that's sort of like your manual then for as far as the cycle goes. They'll tell you how often you'll get CAT scans or MRIs or biopsies or whatever other kind of follow-up that they're using to determine your response to that clinical trial. We've been in situations, unfortunately, where John's, the clinical trial has not succeeded and he's had growth on those trials. And we've had some trials where he's had stability 4 months. So again, it's really, what's the next step? And that schedule is really the most important thing that you'll get once you get accepted to that clinical trial. When you need to look for that next trial, the first thing is, take a day, take a breath, and just pause. I immediately went into, search and destroy mode, and because it's really hard. You think, oh my gosh, this didn't work, what's next? I've got to find something right now. It's hard, it's hard because you think every trial you think this is it, this is going to be the one. And when it's not, you have to face the reality that it's not. This one wasn't the one. However, it might be the one for someone else because everybody's genetics are different. And so all is not lost. And you have created and contributed to all of those patients out there that are also looking for for the cure. So while you feel a bit defeated, I will tell you that you've contributed to science for everybody out there that has stage 4 colorectal cancer. So number 1, all is not lost. Number 2, go back to the trial finder. So, continue to look at the trial finder. Even when you get accepted to a trial, continue looking, continue paying attention. There is a group on Facebook called Colon Town that partnered with Fight CRC with the trial finder. You'll need to apply to be to get onto Colon Town, but there's a clinical trials group that talks daily about trials. There's also another piece to this called the Alana Project, and this is named after someone who unfortunately passed away before I had a chance to meet her or know her. But it's a list that we keep of all of the clinical trials and responses to those. So you can ask that group for, hey, does anybody have any experience with this? Then we keep track of it on a spreadsheet, and we know what trials seem to have even some stability or some success. And we've had lots of patients been in trials where they have been successful. So you want to keep looking, you want to keep using the trial finder, and get onto that closed Facebook page. Colon Town is a closed Facebook page, and then there's lots of neighborhoods, communities on there, one of which is the stage 4 stage 4 trials group. And again, we talk daily about trials and celebrate the successes and mourn the times where the trials weren't exactly successful. The trial finder, is definitely cutting edge. Trials are no longer for patients who are at the end of treatment. Trials are really for patients in the middle of treatment. And these trials are really important to see, what the next best thing is. Our stage 4 patients are living longer and longer and longer. 5 years ago, immunotherapies didn't exist for colorectal cancer. Now, every trial that you see has an immunotherapy along with standard of care or other types of treatments that have been shown to work. Don't think that that clinical trials are for the end of the road. Clinical trials really are what's keeping all of our stage 4 patients going. And I truly believe that there is something out there that what we think right now is a novel therapy is standard of care. So, if the trial doesn't work, I stick with my, you contributed to science. You gave our scientists some data that they're going to use to find the next treatment and the next treatment and the next treatment. Cancer, I say a lot, cancer is a very small community, and stage 4 colorectal cancer is a very, very small community. So we're all contributing to the science, and I think that by using the trial finder, I hope that we all land on, the next best thing that cures cancer for us.